This year's IFA trade show in Berlin may not have introduced a ton of high-profile new phones, but it did feature some interesting new models from familiar brands like Sony and Huawei. While the former continues to try carving out a space for itself in the flagship market, Huawei came to the show with the aim of making waves in the mid-price space, launching the affordable duo of the Huawei Nova and Nova Plus. Crafted from metal, both phones aim a little bit higher in the style scale than some of their peers, while boasting some impressive camera capabilities. At least that's what Huawei says. Does the company actually manage to pull it off? Well, I'm Steven Shank with PhoneArena, bringing you an opportunity to find out right now with my Huawei Nova and Nova Plus review.
For two phones that share the same name, the Huawei Nova and Nova Plus don't look all that much alike, or do they? The Nova's a 5-incher with 12-megapixel camera, while the Nova Plus upgrades to a 5.5-inch screen and 16-megapixel shooter. And while certain elements of the hardware carry over between the phones, they're both metal, have similar button and port layouts, and feature the same sort of design along their sides, where curves transition into beveled edges, it's still really difficult to look at these two from the back and imagine that they're two phones cut from the same cloth. We knew to expect different camera sensors, sure, but from placement to design, there's little in common between how these two cameras were put together. The Nova gets a flush-fitting lens that goes with top-corner iPhone-style placement, while the Nova Plus, with its raised squircle, looks like a page pulled from Samsung's camera playbook. The Nova's design starts with some good ideas, but that big plastic-looking strip surrounding the lens sure detracts from an otherwise sleek metallic look. And while the Nova Plus avoids that particular misstep, it still falls short of a really premium-looking construction. Somewhere between the two of these guys, there is a really beautiful phone, but Huawei couldn't quite bring that hardware together. The screens on both models are 1020 by 1980 resolution LCD panels, with some pretty bold colors. Unfortunately, that seems to be the consequence of a poorly calibrated display, and while Huawei does give us software controls to tweak color balance, it's hard to get things right when you're trying to compensate from a bad starting position. Brightness for the two screens comes out close to 450 nits, just as Huawei advertised, and that's plenty bright for indoor usage, no problem, but we occasionally ran into issues with visibility when dealing with bright outdoor sunlight. Performance is respectable, with each phone powered by a Snapdragon 625 chip and armed with 3GB of RAM, specs similar to the Moto Z Play Droid we looked at just last month. And like that phone, while the Novas fall short of flagship-level performance, they're nice and adequate for taking pics, shooting video, browsing the web, and all manner of social media, just maybe steer clear of really graphics-intensive games. Like the Z Play, the Novas also experience some killer battery life. The Nova's 3020 mAh cell offers over 10 hours of screen on time, and our tests found the 3340 mAh component on the Nova Plus capable of pushing past 12. In either case, day-long operation should be soundly within this hardware's reach. Charging times with the included adapters weren't stellar with either phone, taking about 2 hours to bring capacity back up to full. Both the Nova handsets have 32GB of internal storage, which seems to be the sweet spot these days. You can expand upon that with microSD support on either, but the hybrid SIM tray means you'll be giving up dual SIM operation if you do decide to pop in that microSD card. Multimedia is clearly not the main focus of the Novas, with neither model getting anything like front-facing speakers. Each has a single bottom-edge mono speaker that's decently loud, but we couldn't help but notice how different the two phones sound. The Nova's much more treble-heavy, and while audio from the Nova Plus's speakers is much more even-keeled, it almost sounds muted, bordering on lifeless in comparison. They both get the job done, but neither is anything special. Unfortunately, that's going to be a critique we can't help but keep in mind as we look at the phone's cameras. Huawei's chosen to highlight the imaging prowess of its Nova series, and while the cameras on both phones are fine, producing decent pics and being fast to focus, neither's a sort of best-in-class component that's going to make us want to buy the phone right on its own. The 12-megapixel Nova camera shoots very contrast-heavy, warm-looking shots, while the 16-megapixel Nova Plus adds more detail, but also captures colors that sometimes look a little more subdued. The latter's raised camera bump also makes room for optical stabilization, and we definitely noticed a few times while taking camera samples that pics from the Plus were clearly in focus, while the Nova experienced a touch of motion blur. Both phones record some nice-looking video, extending up to 4K, not bad for some mid-rangers. Autofocus again works really quickly, and while we appreciate Huawei's efforts with noise cancellation while recording audio, heavy processing can leave voices sounding wishy and overcompressed. Huawei's EMUI 4.1 powers both smartphones, based on Android 6.0. Some users will dig the fresh look it imparts on an otherwise familiar platform, but others may find frustration at every turn, with things not quite working the way they expect them to. For For those willing to put in the work though, EMUI can be a fun Android fork to get to know, with lots of customization options and access to some pretty interesting data and tools. Those software enhancements extend to other reaches of the phone's interface, particularly in the much-hyped photo department. There, the latest incarnation of Huawei's beauty and makeup filters are ready to give you an impromptu makeover. The beauty effect imparts a subtle softening, while the makeup effects are some augmented reality stickers that look pulled from Snapchat, and neither is a particularly compelling value add.
That all puts us in a situation we've been in before. Some totally decent mid-range phones that do lots of things okay, but few really great. Now sometimes the manufacturer makes our decision a lot easier with really competitive pricing, but at €400 for the Huawei Nova and $430 for the Nova Plus, these phones are sensibly priced, not must-have deals. Still, the two have a lot going for them. They're well built, have nice battery life, and we really like how the larger Plus doesn't cost an arm and a leg more than the smaller Nova. If you're shopping for a mid-priced phone, put the Nova and Nova Plus on your list. Maybe you'll really like the design of one or the other, and you could do a lot worse than either. But with so many other options in the same neighborhood, be sure you keep your eyes open and shop around. I'm Steven Schenk with PhoneArena. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming smartphone action.